The total crypto market cap is this close to reclaiming that $3 trillion mark. Solana zoomed past $145, and April 2nd could see huge amounts of capital deployed into risk assets like crypto. The charts look inviting, sentiment is turning bullish, and there's plenty of reason for optimism. But is this a real V-shaped recovery, or are we just seeing another dead cat bounce? We've had a shaky few weeks in terms of sentiment, but Solana bounced hard over the last couple of days, and this crypto whale just moved over $250 million worth of BTC. So people are naturally wondering if this is the turning point back towards those all-time highs which we saw in late January, or if something a bit more sinister is happening. Now, despite the tariff noise, there is significant hope around the upcoming April 2nd announcements, bullish news across the Solana ecosystem from DeFi to meme coins, and yes, even updates around the ongoing ETF discussion. So here's everything to watch out for in the coming weeks if you're trying to position yourself ahead of April for potentially parabolic price action. Let's start with the market update because the charts are telling an interesting story here. Solana's bouncing off strong support in the $120 to $130 range, traders are looking for higher lows, and the volume is finally picking up in anticipation of April 2nd, which, as we know, has historically been a bullish window for risk assets. So here's what the OGs think. Arthur Hayes said on Monday that Bitcoin most likely sees a new all-time high at $110,000 rather than retesting 76K, because the Fed is going from quantitative tightening to quantitative easing for treasuries. And he also added that tariffs are likely to be less significant for price action than liquidity, because Fed Chairman Jerome Powell believes in transitory inflation. Now, the most exciting part for retail is, of course, Arthur's longer-term price prediction of $250,000. Now, Permable Michael Saylor is also making headlines again for resuming his BTC purchases, and respect where it's due because the man has aped another $500 million at 84K after consistently top blasting. But not everyone thinks we're headed for a parabolic alt season just yet, because people like Madtam argue that the macro outlook is still cooked and crypto market structure is still broken. So let's have a quick look at what the big money is actually doing with their capital. Starting with the peeps betting against another rally. It's actually not looking too good for the bears here because we're seeing mass short liquidations across the board. Over $130 million worth of shorts were wiped out across major perps last week. On-chain data also shows that Bitfinex whales have been increasing their long positions, which, of course, is a sign that we're finally moving past that terrible sentiment and the poor confidence in crypto that we've seen these last few weeks. Now, the fear and greed index had temporarily showed extreme fear, so it's good to be past that. So, all in all, funding flipped negative, perps volumes are climbing, and smart money seems to be front-running what could be a major rally leading up to April 2nd. But it's not just the smart money, because a grand total of $75 million in assets moved from other chains to Solana last week alone. And the on-chain data from DeFi Llama now shows that over 11 million wallets hold SOL, which of course is a new high and a sign of confidence. But if we zoom into Solana DeFi, we see both on-chain revenues and stablecoin issuance rising steadily since 2024. And if that's not enough, here's a few more reasons why people are still bullish on Solana for the rest of 2025. Let's start with Drift, the self-proclaimed sexiest DEX on Solana. So Drift recently launched Swift Protocol, which is an upgrade that aggregates liquidity across multiple venues, and it connects traders to market makers more efficiently. Then we have Titan Exchange, which finally launched with Solana's first Meta DEX aggregator. Now, it helps users get a better swap price by routing through multiple DEXs for the best execution. And this one is particularly interesting because it challenges Jupiter's monopoly on DEX aggregation by offering the best swap rates in Solana and feeless aggregation. And what's even more impressive is that their proprietary algorithm called Talos can deliver a better price on swaps up to 81% of the time. This is what it looks like in practice. Here's just one example of a $100,000 swap and the savings associated with using Titan over the alternatives. Now, you're right in thinking that $100,000 is a big swap, and most retail users won't be swapping these amounts, at least not regularly. But don't worry if you're not regularly swapping six figures, because here's another example of Titan saving $15 on a much smaller $1,000 swap. So in short, Titan looks to be improving DeFi, and it's helping us get one step closer to being as efficient as TradFi systems, which of course have been optimized over decades. Now, here's an update which is slightly more retail focused, and on the trenches more specifically, it's of course what's going on with Pump.fun, because aside from being one of the most profitable platforms in all of crypto, Pump.fun is now building its own DEX called PumpSwap, which has already reached over $250 million in trading volume in just 4 days. And this kind of makes sense when we compare top revenue generating dApps on Solana, because surprisingly, we see Pump.fun is still leading the charge, despite a massive drop in the number of meme coins being launched in recent weeks. And as we all know, this followed the catastrophic and unfortunately extractive launches of Melania, Enron, Mates, and Libra, which caused massive reputational damage to meme coins, and to a certain extent also to Solana. And that brings us to this next update, which is rather bittersweet for many in the trenches, and frankly anyone that wants to see Solana succeed. Because Boric Law is finally going after Kelsier Ventures and Hayden Davis, the team behind those questionable launches like Melania, Enron, Mates, and most recently Libra, which saw millions of dollars extracted from retail. Now, what's really interesting here is that Meteora is also among the alleged co-conspirators alongside Kelsier and Kip. If you haven't seen it yet, do check out our documentary-style expose on Hayden and his family's shady history. It's by far one of the wildest reports yet. And moving away for a second from the trenches, because this week also brought another big update, this time on the ongoing ETF discussions. Solana ETFs are finally starting to gain serious momentum after Fidelity, which has over $800 billion in assets under management, officially filed for a spot Solana ETF. And just to be clear here, that's Fidelity, the world's third largest asset manager by AUM and second largest BTC ETF issuer behind BlackRock. But what's perhaps even more important in this context is that Fidelity is by far the largest and fastest growing asset manager when we compare active brokerage accounts. Beyond Fidelity, we know that not one but 2 Solana futures ETFs, SolZ and SolT, have been also launched by Volatility Shares, and they're set to go live very soon. And even Crypto.com is getting involved. They're teaming up with Truth Social to launch a new ETF basket that also includes Sol among top crypto assets. Now, according to Bloomberg ETF experts, the main hurdle for a spot ETF approval used to be the absence of any futures ETFs. And what this really means for all of us in the Solana ecosystem is that if futures ETFs do lead to a spot ETF approval, as they did with BTC and ETH, that it's a stamp of approval from the men in suits, and that they could deploy significant amounts of capital.
Even JP Morgan earlier this year had an estimate that if Solana spot ETFs launched, they might haul around 3 to 6 billion.
And finally, on the institutional adoption front, we just saw that BUIDL, the largest tokenized treasury fund by BlackRock and Securitize with over $5 billion, is now officially on Solana. So if you're trying to make sense of all the noise out there, then this is what should be on your radar. The most important date on the horizon is, of course, April 2nd.
There's going to be something else taking place. It's called April 2nd, and it's going to be tariffs. And China will pay, and other countries will pay. We've been ripped off by every country in the world, friend and foe. And on April 2nd, I call it the liberation of America.
It's a key macro and crypto positioning date because, aside from being Liberation Day, it's also the start of Q2. And it's historically been a date where more capital is deployed around risk assets. So, assuming Trump does indeed go easier on the tariffs than he previously hinted, we could once again see capital deployed into crypto. But within the Solana ecosystem, we have exciting news too. On April 25 and 26, we'll see the Solana ecosystem coming together in Istanbul once again for the third and largest ever Solana Crossroads conference. Then in May, we have a 2-part conference bringing together the devs, builders, and of course the TradFi peeps at Accelerate. And if you fancy traveling to Asia in June, we have the Solana Summit in Vietnam. Finally, in December, of course, we have the mother of all Solana events, Breakpoint, which is going to be in Abu Dhabi. All right, beyond events, we have Remora markets. Now, those guys are busy working on bringing tokenized stocks like Tesla and Nvidia to Solana, and they just announced that they're now accepting KYB applications. We also have the much anticipated update from Star Atlas, who released their 2025 update video, and that shows significant in-game progress, and of course, a bright future of Web3 gaming on Solana. So with all of that in mind, is this a real recovery for Solana or another fake out like we saw in the first few days of March? Here's a quick recap. On the one hand, we've got price action improving, whales flipping long, and all the exciting developments that we just saw across the Solana ecosystem. On the other hand, we have a shakeout of the bad actors like Kelsier Ventures, hopefully, and we can expect regulatory clarity in the next 12 months. And potentially huge inflows around April 2nd if Trump decides that tariffs are going to be less severe than expected. So the real question is, when will a Solana spot ETF finally be approved? And will this push Solana back towards those all-time highs? Now, if you feel strongly about what the coming weeks and months are going to look like, do let me know in the comments. And of course, don't forget to subscribe for more updates from across the Solana ecosystem.